I think it's time. Is it time? We're close enough, aren't we?
Yeah.
Chris is here, so we can start. So, okay, there we go. Had to wait until Chris got here, but now that he's here, we can go ahead and get things going. Yeah, I'm going to write an email, and I don't know how I'm going to do it because it's going to sound like I don't do it the way Sarah wants you to do it. That's not really what I'm trying to say. I'm just trying to say you don't have to do it the way Sarah does. Okay, what are we talking about? We're talking about genders around the world and how the genders are perceived around the world. This is really kind of bizarre because if we wander around the world and we try to determine how they feel about homosexuality, some places with really strict governments, they don't care. It's not important to them. And in the United States, it became a political issue. And it was huge. I mean, it was huge in the United States. They were, for the longest time, of course, it was considered a mental illness. Oh, wait a minute. I don't know where I'm shooting this thing. Oh, way too high. Okay, there we go. Okay. Yeah, for a long time, it was a mental illness in the United States. Then the conservative people of the United States decided that they didn't want to support it. There's a church. There's a church in Missouri, Westboro Baptist. No, it's in Kansas. Westboro Baptist. And these people wander around the country and they scream at the funerals of soldiers, saying the reason this man died is because the United States is God hates the United States because they don't condemn homosexuality. As confusing as that is, who are these people? Where did they get this idea? But in the United States, this has been a political issue for an extended length of time. It was against the law. Sodomy was against the law. So homosexuality was considered a crime, and you could be thrown in jail for being gay, as odd as that seems. And the reason that George W. Bush was elected president the first time was because he ran on a platform of outlawing gay marriage, and he would never see this. He didn't want to see this, so the conservatives kept bringing this up. Of course, now it's a non-issue. Nobody cares. Most people in the United States don't really care. But the reality is, each culture looks at gender differently. In the United States, we see a lot of naked women, but do we see a lot of naked men on television? We get to see the Victoria's Secret angels. Is that what they call them? Yeah, I think so. Anyway, those crazy commercials with the ladies romping around in their underwear. How many commercials do we see of men romping around in their underwear?
Hanes commercials.
There are a couple.
Calvin Klein?
Calvin Klein used to, but they don't anymore. What kind of, and this is a question that people ask men, do you wear boxers or briefs? Okay, I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to ask anybody that question, certainly, but, but women, of course, we show them on television. We get to see their underwear. It's as odd as that seems. So each culture is different. If you go to Germany and you watch commercials, you get to see exposed breasts. If you go to Japan, you get to see exposed breasts. So their cultural ideas are completely different. On Thursday night in Germany is nude swimming at the Schwimmbad. So if you want to swim naked, you can't swim naked on any other day, but if you go there on Thursday, you can strip down to your birthday suit and just go swimming, all that you want. I had a friend, a very religious guy. Of course, he's from the United States, but he was a very religious guy, blind as a bat, which was kind of sad. He had really thick glasses. It's kind of odd. He went to a resort in Germany, and he was there on Thursday night. And of course, he went to the Schwimmbad, but before you go into the swimming pool, you have to go through the sauna. And when he went through the sauna, his glasses fogged up and he couldn't see. And so he walks out into the pool area, and as his glasses are clearing, he realizes that he's the only one with a bathing suit on. Everybody else is naked. And of course, he's this very extremely religious kid. So he immediately turns around, and when he did, the floor was wet, and so he slipped and fell down, and he knocked himself out. So here he is, he's laying on the ground, bleeding all over the place. And of course, the Germans come over. They're all naked, but they're all trying to take care of him. So he regains his consciousness. I didn't even get Brandon to smile. This is sad. He regains consciousness, and he's got all these naked people around him trying to help him. This woman's leaning over him, and and whatnot. And of course, he's this very, very religious fellow, and he was just trying to get out of there, which is kind of bizarre. Come on, a smile. That's kind of funny. So he was just trying to escape. It was too funny for words. Anyway, when he's told the story, it was even funnier because he had this, this bandage on his chin because he hit his chin when he landed. One way to look at gender and culture is to determine which gender identity is viewed to be more essentialized, which gender is thought to reflect an underlying unchangeable essence, which gender has less flexibility, flexible ways of being expressed in a socially approved way. Now I know none of this makes any sense, but just wait a second. And I'm going to give you an example, and you're going to go, oh, okay, that makes sense. So which gender would you think would be more essentialized in the United States? The female gender or the male gender? Which one is more flexible? Really difficult to say, isn't it? However, what do you think? Is that okay?
I thought it was going to be female.
Men wearing dresses? Is that okay? I don't want to say anything, but Michelle's got pants on, okay? And all of you have pants on. Everybody else is a male, and here's Michelle, she's a female, she's got pants on. Are you shocked? Are we going to go screaming out of the room? Well, what if I were wearing a dress? Well, what would you think?
It was Halloween.
Sorry. Maybe. But it's okay. It's okay if Michelle wears pants. Nobody cares, right? I assume nobody cares. But if I wore a dress, you guys would be talking about me wearing a dress for the next 5 years. Wouldn't you? So which one is more essentialized? Which one is less flexible?
Male role.
The male role is less flexible. So males have to be a certain way. Girls can play softball. Girls can play baseball. Girls can play football. Boys can't play with dolls. It's just the way it is.
It isn't action figures kind of like a doll?
No, they're action figures. They're not dolls, okay? Americans tend to view male gender identity to be essentialized. Wait a minute, let me get rid of this damn thing. Okay. To be more essentialized than female gender identity, most Americans do not seem to find it disturbing or unusual for women to present themselves like men, wearing pants, having short hair, not wearing facial makeup. Really doesn't make any difference. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. But if men wear makeup, all of a sudden everybody's up in arms. If I wear a dress, everybody's all pissed off. If I wore high heels, what would you think?
I think it's uniform.
It's not fair. Michelle can wear whatever the hell she wants to wear. Nobody cares, but I put on strange clothes and you guys go berserk. That's just not right. Or participating in stereotypically male behaviors, girls can play with trucks, girls can play ice hockey, for example, and nobody cares, nobody thinks anything about it. Girls play soccer. As a matter of fact, the U.S. women's soccer team has won more World Cups than the U.S. men's team, which hasn't won any at all. Of course, not important. Girls can play hockey or really, really rough sport where people get their teeth knocked out. But is it okay if women play hockey? Nobody cares. Does this look okay to you? She's actually a hockey player on the USA hockey team. She's not wearing pearls, but neither is he. Does this look okay? No, this doesn't look right at all, but nobody cares, right? So the male gender is more essentialized in the United States. They are less flexible. That's the way it works in the United States. Many Americans do find it disturbing or unusual for men to present themselves as women, wearing dresses, high heels, or lipstick, or to participate in stereotypically female behaviors such as playing with dolls or taking ballet lessons. Male identity is less changeable and thus more essentialized. So we worry about boys playing with dolls because we think they're going to be gay. Or we did. Maybe things will change now that gay marriage is legal in the United States. Maybe we will stop attacking that sexual orientation like we have in the past. Maybe. But it's going to take a while. There are still going to be people like the Westboro Baptist Church that will scream about the United States not condemning homosexuality, and that's why God hates us now. God used to love us when we condemned homosexuality, but now that we don't, of course, God must hate us, as confusing as that is. Other countries don't care. If you go to...
Japan, they have in Japan, don't they have like guys that dress up as women?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, and nobody cares. Nobody cares. It's not important because the male gender isn't essentialized in Japan.
Didn't Australia just have like the vote on same-sex marriage last week or something?
In Japan?
No, Australia.
Oh, yes, they did.
Now we got the results of that.
I think that it passed. I think it's legal in Australia now. Of course, we're not the only culture that exists. You like this lady, don't you? She's hot, isn't she?
No, I just like the fact that she has more than one hand.
More than one arm.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's kind of, yeah. I like the fact that she's carrying a severed head in one of her arms. In Hindu myths, many more male gods change into female goddesses than female goddesses change into gods. The Hindu religion involves goddess worship, and many of the most powerful gods are female. Kali, this is Kali here. Shakti, Durga, and Maya are all the female gods. And of course, there is a branch of the religion where they only worship Kali. According to the Hindu religion, female identity is viewed as pure, strong, and powerful. In India, the male gender identity was more mutable and less essentialized than the female gender.
Is that the same one that can destroy everything when it's with somebody else? At the same.
Yeah, she's got the sword.
Okay, was that sort of
The sword of retribution.
That's what I'm thinking. Okay.
Okay.
Make sure it was the same person. Okay,
Sure. Yeah. When there is a god that lays waste to the world, it will be Kali that
Okay.
does that. That's why she's got all these men's heads on her belt, and she's got the severed head in her hand.
So that God can change from male to female?
Yes.
I'm confused.
Isn't that cool? Who can argue with that? She also, with what she nurses, she has breasts, and she nurtures everybody. This is the same God that has the sword of retribution in one hand, also nurtures everyone.
Yeah, because I thought
That
that person, that God was always male, so that's why I was asking.
Well, males usually don't breastfeed. No, she brings forth all bounty, so things grow because of her. She has a breast that she feeds suckles the child with. So I don't see any. And she's got the scythe. See, this is a scythe, and that's what you harvest your crops with the scythe. Of course, she's also got the sword of retribution. As exciting as that is. Okay, so essentialized. I just used the two countries. The United States, of course, the male gender is essentialized, and in The Hindu religion is. The female gender is essentialized. Festinger in 1957 proposed that people have a powerful motivation to be consistent, and their cognitive dissonance is the distressing feeling we have when we observe ourselves acting inconsistently. So, of course, we try to conform as much as possible. We try to be the same as everybody else. Because if I decide that I'm going to be different, that causes cognitive dissonance. Everybody else is acting this way, and I'm acting this way. You know, this causes me discomfort in my own mind. And I want to be comfortable. I want to be able to go to sleep at night rather than worry about wearing dresses. Nobody else is wearing dresses, and here I am with a dress on. Of course, I do wear a dress.
A kilt?
No.
Oh, because that's isn't it a dress?
I've got a dress that I wear for graduation.
Oh.
It's a robe. You can call it a robe if you want, but damn it, it goes all the way down to my feet. So it's pretty much a dress. Doesn't have a belt, but it does. It's a straight line, but it's still a dress. I call it my dress. You can call it anything you want. Regalia, whatever. And of course, Jeff is going to be wearing a dress this spring. Aren't you graduating this spring?
No, never.
So you're not going to be able to walk? You're not going to wear a dress?
Not until I graduate from my ASU.
Okay.
That's how that goes.
Okay. Well, he doesn't get to wear a dress. But I'll be there in my dress, and if you want to see me, I'll be there in my dress. Brandon, you're graduating in the spring. Okay, you get to wear a dress. It'll be cool. It's cool.
Matching belt.
It won't be nearly as fancy as mine is. Mine has blue, and it's got yellow stuff on it. I know, mine's really hot. When I say hot, I mean, boy, it's really warm because I almost died last year. Anyway, so I get to wear a dress. Brandon's going to wear a dress, which is okay. You can call it a robe if you want. You can call it anything you want. Okay. The belief that we can easily change and are expected to change is referred to as an incremental theory of self. Traits are malleable and can, of course, be improved. So if you think that you can change, that everything, that your life isn't set in stone, your personality is not set in stone, this is known as the incremental theory of self. There is another theory of self, and that is known as the entity theory of self. Aspects of the self largely are resistant to change, which is known, of course, as the entity theory of self. Individuals with this view see their attitudes to be largely inborn. So if I'm a brilliant person, I will always be a brilliant person. It'll never go away, and it's set in stone. If you think that that IQ means that you can either learn things or not learn things, then that's the entity theory. I come from a family that practices entity theory. I've told you this before. I've got some really brilliant relatives, cousins, aunts, uncles. Now, the reason that you've never heard, well, actually, it's on my mother's side of the family. They're good ones, and they're Dragoos. And the reason you've never heard that name hardly at all is because they're also lazy. They have really high IQs, but they're lazy as, can I say shit? They're really lazy people. So and some of them dropped out of school in the 7th and 8th grades. But they're brilliant. They have really high IQs. They're really good at watching Jeopardy on television. They can watch Wheel of Fortune and get all the answers right almost every time. They live in trailers on welfare because they're lazy. They are just lazy people. IQ just means potential. And if you never use it, I have a sister with an IQ of 135. She's never done jack with anything. She keeps bragging about her IQ of 135. She's right, she has an IQ of 135. She hasn't done anything with her IQ. So it doesn't mean it's just a number. If you never do anything, it's just means potential. You have to live up to your potential, not down to your potential in her case. So I've got all these brilliant relatives who have IQs, these astronomical IQs in the 160, 170 range, and they're all on welfare, living in trailers on their parents' property because they're too lazy, and I would use another word, but I'm not going to do that. They're just too lazy to use it. Anyway, that's the entity theory. These individuals assume that because they're so smart, then the federal government should come by and give them money. And they do. And that's how damn smart they are, because the federal government pays them to eat. And they'll send them to school. I have a niece that eventually went to school, and she went into the nursing program, and they said, "Oh my God, you're brilliant. You should be a doctor." You know what she does today? She has a nursing degree. Guess what she does today? Nothing. She's too lazy. She can't get off of her dead ass to do anything. Even though they wanted to send her to medical school. Even though she has a RN degree. She still doesn't do jack squat. She's too lazy. Anyway, that's the entity theory. Individuals with this view see their attributes to be largely inborn, of course, and since they're inborn, people should come to them instead of them go to other individuals. And this, of course, is a way of looking at it, set in stone. My intelligence is set in stone, and of course, she feels that her intelligence can grow. As you know, I just went to my 50th high school reunion. I told you that there were 18 people in my class that were geniuses. Of those 18 people, one of them died from alcoholism. My best friend drank himself to death at 39, which was cool. I know, it's like, she's talking about Jack Kerouac. Jack Kerouac was a drug addict, and he did all kinds of strange things, but he was a good writer. Of course, he wrote On the Road, and then he didn't write anything else for the rest of his short life. He died a drug addict and an alcoholic. I know, but he wrote a book. That's not bad. He wrote a book in his 20s, and that's all he ever did for the rest of his life. That's kind of like my friend. He didn't do anything. He invented a quick draw knife sheath. That's what he did. I know. So I don't know. It sounds so stupid. But there were a number of us that actually did something with our lives, and the rest of the guys just kind of didn't do anything because they're too lazy. So it all has to do with potential. Some of us are this person. Some of us are this person. And we're stuck in the mud, I guess. Sometimes they get stuck in the mud. And some of my classmates got stuck in the mud. The smartest person in the class, the highest degree she ever achieved was a BSW. She had a Bachelor of Social Work. She didn't get her MSW. She didn't get it. She wasn't an LCSW, licensed clinical social worker. She was just a social worker. And that's all she did. She was the smartest person in the class. She scored a perfect score on the SAT. She's brilliant. What did she do with the rest of her life? Well, not a whole hell of a lot. And the rest of us, of course, we did things. One of us became a doctor. One of us was a city planner. She did Zippo. We had a veterinarian in the class. Really cool guy. Anyway, some people did some things and some people didn't. Research found that 60% of the Chinese high school students said that the key to success in math is to study hard. The harder you study, the more likely you're going to be able to do it. Some people think that I can't do math because my brain doesn't work in that way. And some people's brains actually don't work in that way. That's fine. But as far as the Chinese are concerned, anybody can learn calculus. Anybody can do some of these strange classes that my son is taking right now. As a matter of fact, almost everybody in his class for his master's degree isn't from the United States. They're from someplace else. I know. Because nobody told them they couldn't do math. Americans, we're not very good at it. We're just not very good at it because we think that our intelligence is that big block of stone right there. In contrast, less than 25% of American high school students felt this way, that all they needed to do was work at it and they could get it. They could get the concept. 25%. And this is one of the reasons why, and actually when I was up in Montana, this is one of the things that they talk about all the time. The fact that Indians can't learn math. Sorry. You got the wrong genetics to learn math. Is that possible? And the answer is, of course, not just no, but hell no. Who the hell came up with that idea? Indians can't do math. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Anybody can do math. Japanese believe more than Americans that intelligence is based on how hard you try rather than on what you are born with. And of course, you are born with a slight degree of intelligence. And maybe math came easy to you, or maybe it was difficult for you. But anybody can do it. That's as far as the Chinese and the Japanese are concerned. They think anybody can do it. To get into an American university, you typically need to get an acceptable score on the SAT test. The SAT was originally designed to measure innate aptitudes and not efforts in one's classes. However, so they created this test to find out how your aptitudes. It's just like the ASVAB test. The ASVAB test, they give it to people joining the military. And it tells them whether they have an aptitude in mechanics, in general, mechanics, medical. I can't remember all the fields. There's 5 of them. But from your score, from your ASVAB score, then they put you into a certain job. They want to put you in a job where you're going to succeed, so that's what they do. And the SAT test is very similar. It wants to know your innate aptitude. But then people started studying the SAT test. And it turns out that you can learn how to take the test. And if you learn how to take the test, you can raise your score. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to be successful in college, but it means that you can study this test and get a higher score. This has been a source of frustration for the test makers because the tests are no longer serving the function that they were originally designed for, which has sparked much policy debate about their utility. And as a matter of fact, there are some institutions that do not require the SAT test. This institution doesn't require the SAT test. They will accept it, but it doesn't require the SAT test. Harvard doesn't require the SAT test anymore.
Do most community colleges, do they not accept the SAT? You don't have to take the SAT?
Most community colleges have open enrollment, so they'll accept anybody. But it's the larger institutions. And it's especially the more traditional institutions. Now, you would think Harvard would do that, but Harvard believes, see, that they're part of this debate. And they're the ones that say, well, wait a minute, the SAT test, you can get a high SAT score just by studying this stuff. Studying questions like the ones that are on the SAT test. And of course, that's not fair. Well, or is it fair? They're looking for the best and the brightest, but you can jack up your score just by studying the test.
It's not the same thing as the GRE test?
GRE has to do with the graduate school, graduate record exam. Yeah, it's the same idea. And yes, you can study the GRE. As a matter of fact, isn't that what Sarah, were you? Yeah, you were at that meeting. I was sitting right beside you. Yeah, she told you to start studying for the GRE. That's what she said.
Is it like the SAT where you can somewhat like not take the GRE? Somehow still get in, just like how the SAT.
There are some schools in Mexico that you can do that with.
Okay, here's the deal. When I started, I went to an elite school. So when I graduated from college with my bachelor's degree, I applied to a master's program. And they said, well, because you went to this institution, my institution, you don't have to take the GRE. We'll just accept you.
Oh, that's nice.
I know, it was nice. And once I finished one master's degree, when I went for my second master's degree, they said, well, you didn't take the GRE. And I said, no. Well, you've already finished one master's program, so we're just going to let you in. So they let me in. And then when I went for my PhD, they said, well, you haven't taken the GRE test. I said, no. They said, well, since you have 2 master's degrees, we're not going to require it for you. But Sarah had to take it. course, you know, I started this whole process before she was born, which is kind of depressing. Damn it. Don't cry, Jeff. I'm the one that should be crying. So the question is, do you have to take the GRE? There are some institutions that don't require the GRE either. I was able to waive it. And I've been in five graduate programs. And I didn't have to take it any place that I got into school. But that's me, you know, and like I said, I went to an elite school, so it's like hard. If you get a degree from Harvard, you don't have to take the GRE. You know, it's that kind of a situation. If you want to specialize like LSATs, the LSATs have to do with law school, or MedCats, that's for medical school. Yeah, you'll probably have to take the MedCat or the LSAT. But since I was just getting a master's degree in psychology, I didn't have to take the GRE. That was me though, like I said. And Sarah wants you to start studying right now for it. So. And she had to take it, so. Of course, she was coming down from Canada also, so that may have had something to do with whether she had to take it or not. And she went to Northwestern, which is another elite school, relatively elite school. It's a private school in the Big Ten, which is kind of bizarre. Very expensive. What are we doing? Okay. Yeah, so initially the SAT test was supposed to measure your innate aptitude. In other words, it was supposed to measure, it was like the first IQ test you took. First IQ test isn't trying to find out if you should be a second grader. It tried to find out how intelligent you were. Can you study for the IQ test and get a higher score? Well, I guess you could, but I mean, that destroys the whole reason for the IQ test. And the SAT test has become a test that you can study for now, or at least that's what they have done, because people have screwed up the damn test, so it's not the same as it used to be. IQ tests are regularly given in public schools in the States, and the results influence decisions on whether students should attend gifted or remedial classes. And of course, we do the same thing here, but we don't give you an IQ test. As a matter of fact, people are arguing as to whether IQ tests are accurate. The answer is probably no, they're not accurate at all. Maybe they used to be, but they aren't anymore. In Japan, to get into a good university, you need to do well on university entrance exams that test your mastery of a large amount of material. This is extremely stressful for the poor Japanese. So being a kid in Japan is no fun at all. You go to school 240 days out of, whereas in the United States you only go for 180 days. They go to school on Saturdays. They don't get any time off. And there's always the pressure of passing this damn test. If you don't pass the test, a lot of kids will commit suicide. Some kids will commit suicide. It's very common in Japan. But if you know anything about the Japanese culture, suicide is what you do if you have no other option. Harikiri. So suicide is very common, relatively common in Japan, as strange as that may seem. In the United States, of course, we try to keep our children from doing it. We don't want them to do it. But in Japan, it's relatively common. Different culture. This is one aspect. The suicide is acceptable over there. Suicide's acceptable, and rape is common. Rape is part of their culture, as confusing as that is. Does that mean there's a lot of rape in Japan? Actually, no. It's not normal, but it's part of their literature. They write about it all the time. And I've got to figure out what that word is. When I was stationed in Japan, there was a section in the bookstore, and it had this word above it, and that meant rape culture. There was literature written in Japan about rape, as confusing as that is. Now, when they talk about rape, it's not the same thing as in the United States. In the United States, somebody jumps out from a bush, grabs a young lady, tears off her clothes, and has sex with her. That's not what it is in Japan. In Japan, it's a samurai that has killed all the men, and so he has his way with one of the women who partially wants to have sex with him. I mean, so rape isn't as violent. Well, it is, but it's not.
Well, rape is like the victim is not willing, is
Submission.
to it.
It's actually submission is what it is. So the whole concept, I mean, their idea of rape isn't the same as our idea of rape. I guess the definition, the word doesn't really fit. It's more like submission, because that's what happens. He goes and he grabs a woman, and she collapses in his arms. It's kind of like one of those strange books that women read. I don't know. She just collapses in his arms. And then he has his way with her. Is she in love with him? No, emotion's not involved. Well, as Jeff knows from reading the novel that I gave him to read, emotion isn't part of it, as confusing as that is. Even if there's an emotional connection between the two, sex is almost mechanical, as confusing as that may be. Right? Didn't you find that to be true? Yeah. I don't know. Different cultures, different ideas. But we're not talking about rape, we're talking about suicide. We're talking about getting into a school, getting into a good school. So what happens if you don't pass this test? You become a factory worker. You become a drone. You become a worker bee. That's what happens to you in Japan. Is that okay? Well, yeah, it's okay, but it's not a positive thing for your family.
But they also commit suicide because it's against the honor of the family, kind of in a way.
I'm sorry?
Like they also commit suicide because it looks badly upon their family.
It dishonors their family, exactly. And you don't want to ever dishonor your family, because it's not just you, and it's not just the people, the people around you, it's all of your ancestors. You've embarrassed all your ancestors all the way back, as far as you can trace your family. In the United States, we don't give a rat's patoot about our great-grandparents. Who cares? What do they care? You know, they're dead. What do we care? The Japanese bar exam to become a lawyer is notoriously difficult. Only 2.5% of the people pass in every year, and those who do, on average, have failed the exam 4 times before ultimately succeeding. That's how hard the bar exam is in Japan. That's how hard it is to become a lawyer in Japan. If you pass on the first go-around, it means that you're brilliant. Approximately 2/3 of those taking the American bar exam each year pass it, with about 3/4 of them passing it on the first attempt. My sister was a lawyer, and she passed it on the first go-around. She went to law school with a guy by the name of Dan Quayle. And if you don't remember who Dan Quayle is, he was the Vice President of the United States under George H.W. Bush. He was the Vice President. And he was dumb as dirt. And it took him 3 shots to pass the bar exam. His wife, however, passed it on the first shot. And my sister went to law school with those guys. And they were getting updates, of course, on who was passing and who was taking and whatnot. So she had all that information. She thought it was funny that the wife passed it, and it took Dan 2 times before he passed it. But, of course, in class, Dan wouldn't answer any questions. He couldn't answer any questions. But his wife was quite smart. And his wife wasn't very attractive. He was pretty. He was a pretty guy. Got to look at some pictures of Danny Quayle sometime. J. Danforth Quayle was the guy's name. The interesting thing about Dan Quayle is that he went to DePaul the same time I went to Wabash, and we ran into each other a couple different times. I ran track, but of course he didn't run track, but because that's too strenuous. You have to sweat if you do that. He was a golfer, and so we ran into each other a couple times.
Is DePaul Ivy League school?
DePaul with a W. You're thinking DePaul with an L.
Yeah, with an L.
Yeah, with an L. That's up in Chicago. Yeah, that's a much larger school. It's also a Catholic school. DePaul with a W, D-E-P-A-U-W, is a Methodist school. It's in Greencastle, Indiana. It's a small liberal arts school. Anyway, and he went to DePaul, but evidently didn't learn anything. Yeah, he was kind of, and he was wealthy. He was extremely wealthy, and that's how he got into law school. His grades weren't high enough to get him into law school, but he got in because he had a lot of money.
Sizable donation?
You can't buy your way into law school. They only have a certain number of openings. And you really can't buy your way into law school. So how did he get in? He got in as a minority. This pasty white boy, wealthy white boy, was a minority. So what was his minority? He didn't have native ancestry. He wasn't part black. He wasn't Asian. How in the world did he get in? I'm sorry?
From the Levis family?
He was wealthy, and he claimed that that was a minority. His lawyers got him into law school. I know, it was funny. My poor sister, she was so livid. She hated Dan Quayle. She used to talk about him all the time. Of course, he went to DePaul, and I went to Wabash, so she's making fun of this guy the whole time. I mean, it was while she was going to law school. It was too funny for words. Anyway. The five-factor model of personality started as a personality profile test developed to test the U.S. Air Force officers in the 1950s, and it was developed by Tupes and Crystal. And if you look at the five-factor model, they don't even mention Tupes and Crystal. And the reason they don't mention Tupes and Crystal is because Tupes and Crystal were working for the United States military, and they only published in military journals. And for that reason, nobody read it. Nobody knew about this. But then it was discovered by somebody else later on in the 1980s. And so they published the five-factor model using the research done by Tupes and Crystal, and they're the ones that get credit for it, as irritating as that is. I'm not even going to mention those guys' names, because that pisses me off. These guys did the work. This is Tupes right here. Anyway, they did the work. Did they get credit for it? Well, not really. And that's unfortunate. So if you read the five-factor model, you can look at it in your book. They don't give Tupes and Crystal the credit for it at all. Tupes and Crystal used factor analysis to determine which of Cattell's 16 personality factors were significant. In other words, these guys were statisticians. They weren't really, well, they were psychologists, but they were statistical analysis is what they used. So they used factor analysis in order to determine which of these 16 factors were the most important. They came up with 5 that factored as most important over and over again. And of course, remember, they're working with an American population. They're also working with a military population that is primarily male. Well, actually, it was exclusively male in the 1950s. And they were trying to determine what makes a good military officer, especially a flying officer. So they were looking for a good officer. So it was very specific. They looked at Cattell's 16 PF. They were looking at his personality factor model. And these are the 16 factors: warmth, reasoning, emotional stability, dominance, liveliness, rule consciousness, social boldness, sensitivity, vigilance, abstractedness, privateness, apprehension, openness to change, self-reliance, perfectionism, and tension. So when we talk about personality theories, one of the individuals that we talk about is Cattell. And Cattell came up with these as the 16 primary personality factors that we need to look at. So what Tupes and Crystal did, they took these 16 and they determined which one was the most important, which ones were the most important for Air Force officers, especially flying officers. What kind of a personality do we want these guys to have? And this is what they came up with. Openness to experience reflects a person's intelligence and curiosity about the world. So openness was one of the things they looked at. Conscientiousness indicates how responsible and dependable an individual is. Remember, we're talking about Air Force officers here. So they're talking about intelligence and curiosity. They're talking about responsible and dependability. Extroversion indicates how much an individual is active and dominant. So they're looking at dominance and activity. Agreeableness is the extent to which a person tends to be warm and pleasant. And then neuroticism is the degree to which an individual can be seen as emotionally stable and unpredictable. Okay, so when we're looking at an Air Force officer, what do we want them to be? Intelligent and curious? Do you want a military officer that is intelligent and curious? No, you don't want him to be intelligent.
I don't think this is
You don't want them. How about responsible and dependable? Is that an important factor? Does that make sense? Do we want them to be responsible and dependable? I mean, that's pretty much what the military is all about anyway. Extroversion, do we want them to be active and dominant? Yeah. Okay.
Take initiative.
I'm sorry?
Take initiative.
Yes. Well, and they need to be bossy, right? I mean, they have to boss around all the enlisted personnel. And of course, they're deathly afraid that the enlisted people are actually smarter than they are. And the reality is that the enlisted personnel actually have information that they don't have. They have minuscule, they have minutia. They have all the tiny little pieces of information. And these people have to be dominant. They have to be dominant over those individuals. They can't have all that information. They have to allow those people to have the information. They have to be dominant over them. So they boss them around, tell them what to do. Go take that hill. You know, that kind of thing. Well, in the Air Force's case, they're not telling anybody to go take anything. They're telling them, go fix that plane. The officer themselves, they can't fix the plane, but they can tell somebody to do it, and that's what they need to have. Okay. So extroversion is important. Agreeableness, warm and pleasant, is warmness and pleasantness, is that important for these guys? How agreeable do we want our officers to be?
Approachable.
Do you really want an approachable officer?
Someone that I can think of.
Do you want him hugging all of his men? How agreeable do we want these people to be anyway?
just enough to where they work together as a team, right? Isn't that the whole point?
Yeah, not very warm and certainly not very pleasant. We want our officers to be grouchy people. Wait a second. Let me show you a film, a video. This just came out about a week ago. This is after Charlottesville.
Did you watch Good Morning Vietnam? That has a lot of that in there.
This is the general at the Air Force Academy.
Oh.
Air Force Academy General.
Oh, is it with the racist comments on the wall?
Yeah, he's the one. Yeah, you gotta listen to this guy barking at these people. YouTube. I think it's on YouTube. Yeah, see how warm and fuzzy this guy is. General Welsh's speech. Now his name's not Welsh, it's something else.
But he was passionate in his statement.
Yeah, well there's no fuzzy.
Yeah, there's no fuzzy. He's not being nice about it, but he's very passionate about it.
That's not it. Rats. Anyway.
It's on the NPR website.
NPR? Okay. All right, let me go down. Oh, wait a minute. NPR. Jason Isabel? No, that's not his name. Your strategic plan. I can't find it. I was watching it yesterday. I was going, oh my God, this guy's.
Yeah, I came across him this morning.
Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, so do we want him to be agreeable? And the answer is maybe a little bit, but not very much. Okay. Do we want him to really be warm? No, probably not. So this is a negative. Neuroticism is the degree to which an individual can be seen as emotionally stable and unpredictable. So we certainly don't want them to be unpredictable because they have to do the same thing over and over and over and over again. But we want them to be emotionally stable. So neuroticism is a negative as well. So these two are negatives and the rest of them are positives. Openness is a positive. We want them to be intelligent and curious. We want them to be conscientious, responsible, and dependable. We want them to be extroverted to the extent that they're active and dominant. But we don't want them to be especially warm and pleasant, and we don't want them to be emotionally unstable and unpredictable. Okay. So this is what we want our officers to be, right? So they came up with these 5 factors. Of course, they were just looking at Air Force officers, but then they took the 5-factor model and they've used it in a lot of psychological research. Okay. Does this make sense? Okay. This is what we want our officers to be like. The 5-factor model proposes that all personality traits largely reflect some combination of these 5 core traits. And if we go back to the 16 PF, we can fit all 16 of those factors into some aspect of the 5-factor model. All personality traits should show significant correlations with at least one, if not more, of these core traits. The 5 factors, so we started out with Cattell's 16 PF, and we reduced that down to the 5-factor model, or the Big 5. Some people call it the Big 5. And all that has done is it has taken Cattell's 16. There's also a 32 personality traits. You can take all 32 of those personality traits and you can fit them into these 5. There are aspects of those personality traits that fit in with these 5. The 5 factors can be seen to reflect the basic structure of personality. And of course, that's the theory, that there are only 5 factors to personality. There is a question as to how well the 5-factor structure generalizes elsewhere. And the answer is, this works in the United States. We can take the Big 5 and we can move it up into Canada, and it works. We can take it over to England, and it works. We can take it over into Western Europe, and it works. But what if we take it someplace else? And the answer is, it don't work. Because other people have different types of personalities. An analysis of indigenous Chinese personality trait terms found a set of factors that were not the same as the Big 5. Rather, 4 factors emerged that were captured by the following labels. Now remember, we're in the United States and in Western Europe and Canada, of course, we're talking about individualistic countries. So if we go to a collectivist country, we're going to find different personality traits. In the United States, uniqueness is really important. But in China, of course, it's a very, very crowded country. So they have to be able to get along with each other. So they have 4 different personality traits that ain't American. Dependability, reflecting responsibility, optimism, and trustworthiness. So dependability was extremely important as far as the Chinese were concerned. Interpersonal relatedness, reflected harmony, thrift, relational orientation, and tradition. So interpersonal relatedness was extremely important in China. It's the only way you're going to survive in an area that is in an area that's that crowded. The United States, not so much. It's not important to us. Social potency, reflecting leadership, adventurousness, and extroversion. So this was important, social potency, and individualism. As compared to the United States, reflecting logical orientation, defensiveness, and self-orientation. So whereas in the United States this is a given, because we are all individualists, in China it was a personality attribute. Because it's a given in the United States, but not in China. You always need somebody to lead, even in a collectivist situation. You always need somebody to lead. In the United States, we can pick anybody out of the room. I picked Michelle since she's different than everybody else. Well, you're a female. You do wear the same pants we all wear, so that's okay. If you wore a dress, but then again, if you wore a dress, I'll wear a dress. So that's not going to happen. You wear high heels, I'm going to wear high heels. Similar approaches have been taken in other cultures. Researchers looking at Filipino personality traits discovered 2 additional traits to the Big 5, temperamentalness and a negative valence dimension. This is kind of interesting because remember the wife, not the wife, but the girlfriend of Paddock is a Filipino lady with an Australian passport. Okay. Negative valence dimension means that you accept negative things. You accept, there is a dimension to your personality that is negative, and that is accepted by society. All right. Now she's running around with, we just found out today that this guy was almost an isolationist. That he built a security fence around his place because he didn't want people looking at what he was doing in his place. And here this lady lived with him. Now why in the world would she put up with that? She put up with it because she was Filipino and she had this negative valence dimension. She accepted things that were different from the norm. This is very important in the Filipino culture, is the fact that they're doing something that other people don't accept. In the United States, we're trying to figure out what the hell's going on with Stephen Paddock and why he blasted away for 11 minutes at 22,000 people from 300 yards away. We're trying to figure that out. But in the Philippines, they wouldn't. He's just different. There is a negative aspect to him. So when we read about what she thought about her boyfriend, one of the reasons she liked him was because he was different than everybody else. And this is very important. This is very important in the Philippines. They're always looking for somebody that's different. It's really kind of bizarre because, how can I explain this? I was in the military right after Vietnam, and one of the places that you went for your R&R was the Philippines. The Air Force had an Air Force base on the Philippines, Clark Air Force Base, and the Navy had a naval base in the Philippines, Subic Bay. Now both of them were destroyed when Mount Pinatubo erupted. Both of the places were destroyed. However, there were a lot of people coming back from the Philippines with, if you were stationed at Clark, a lot of people came back with Filipino wives. And a lot of these guys were weird. I mean, they were strange people. But I mean, to the Filipinos, that was attractive. It was attractive to be unique. And that has to do with the negative valence dimension. It was really kind of strange. So these Filipino ladies that everything else seems normal, with them, they're hooked up with this guy that is an introvert. He's never goes out. He gets drunk every night. You know, there's something different about this guy, and he doesn't even fit in with Americans, let alone with a foreign group.
So they were comparing it to being in America. I'm trying to understand what the normal is normal to them.
Well, you got to remember the Philippines is not only it's a group of islands, but they're relatively crowded. Not only that, but they have a lot of different tribal groups in the Philippines. So this whole negative thing, they're looking for somebody that's unique. I mean, it's the uniqueness that they were accepting, that they found attractive. As confusing as that may be. That's still, it's not making any sense to you?
No, I understand that part.
Okay. But the part you don't understand is?
What do they consider normal compared to what we consider normal?
What do they consider normal compared to what we consider normal?
And their separate societies.
Well, the closer they live to the base, the more they would accept our normal as normal. Our norms as their norms.
So they go on to American customs?
Right, yeah, the closer they were to the...
and that's where they can distinguish what's normal from the American.
Right, yeah, so if they were living near Clark and then they moved someplace else to the capital, which is on another island, then their norms would be different from the people that they lived around. Not only that, they would probably be from a different tribal grouping. So their norms were the same as it was in their vicinity. It's propinquity. It's the people that are close to you that you see as normal. So, yeah, I know, it's kind of bizarre and kind of confusing. And I could never figure out why these individuals would marry these really weird guys. I mean, it just didn't make any sense. When I was stationed at Reese, my barber was a female from the Philippines. And all the people working in the barber shop were Filipino women. And they kept, I lost my wife. She ran away from me. And these women couldn't believe that a woman would leave her babies. And so they were going to find me a wife. They were going to bring over their sister to marry me, because here I was, an American GI without a wife with 2 kids, and they just couldn't. That just didn't fit. I mean, it was so abnormal to them. But my attractiveness wasn't the fact that I'm such a pretty guy, that I'm such a tall, dark, and handsome fellow. That wasn't my attractiveness. What was attractive to them was the fact that I was doing something that was unique, that was different. And that has to do with this negative valence dimension. So they were all going to find me a wife. They never did. But I was going, geez, that would be nice. Just bring her over, you know. But of course, that's not going to happen either. Okay. In an investigation of 11 different language groups in South Africa, it revealed 9 underlying factors, some of which overlap with the Big Five, but other factors that did not. Integrity was one. Of course, integrity doesn't have anything to do with the Big Five. And relationship harmony. That doesn't have anything to do with the Big Five either. But that was very important in South Africa. And I've given you this picture of South Africa, of course. Some of the individuals are white. They are Afrikaners, potentially. And the others are natives of South Africa. But they all have on white bathing suits. Or, no, I guess not. Some studies in other languages reveal evidence for factors in addition to the Big Five. Other studies sometimes do not find evidence for all 5 of the Big Five traits. In particular, openness to experience is the trait that emerges the least consistently in studies conducted in other languages. Openness to experience. And if you remember, openness to experience had to do with intelligence and curiosity. So if you're living in the same community, then openness to new experiences, or openness to any experience, of course, wouldn't be something that they would adhere to. The idea is that everybody has lived in this community for 1,000 years, and we like some people and we don't like other people, and it really doesn't. It's not important whether you're intelligent or whether you're curious. You're living in Romania, you're living in Bulgaria, you're living in a country where everybody's lived in the same place for an extended length of time. And for that reason, openness to experience is not important to people in Eastern Europe. The North Central Great Plains, especially around Minnesota and Wisconsin, is the epicenter for friendly and conventional cluster, as residents are the highest in the country for the traits of extroversion, agreeableness, and conscientiousness. So if you want to move someplace where people are nice to you, then these green states are the ones where you need to move. Nicest people in the United States live in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, maybe not Missouri, Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota. Okay, anyway, that is the North Central Great Plains. The western states from Oregon down to Arizona house the relaxed and creative cluster, where there is the lowest neuroticism and the highest openness to experience. So there you go. This is you guys. You are the relaxed and creative cluster. Congratulations on that. Okay, so where do you not want to go? Well, here's where you don't want to go. The northeastern states, especially New York and Massachusetts, are home to the temperamental and uninhibited cluster where people score the highest on neuroticism and the lowest on conscientiousness. So if you want to be insulted or treated badly, then that's the place to go. New York or Massachusetts, Boston or New York. And if you've ever been to either of those cities, they ain't the nicest people in the world. Well, actually, they're some of the meanest people in the world. They don't talk nice to you. They insult you. I mean, it's really kind of bizarre. And if you don't speak with the same accent that they have, wow, they just give you a hard time. They treat you like you're mentally deficient. Let me say, I can say that. So if you, this is someplace that you probably need to stay away from, because they're not the nicest people in the world. And of course, the Yankees are in the American League playoff. I think Boston is too, aren't they? I think they are. I know that's not important. I don't know who won last night. The score is 8-7 in the 8th inning when I turned the television out. Colorado and Arizona. I'm sorry. Arizona. It's Arizona Diamondback. The whole damn state. Okay, there you go. So the question is, what's going to happen next? I have no answer for that. Okay, that's the end of chapter 5, 6. Whew. Okay, this is the 7th week, right? Yeah, and I'm starting on chapter 7, so I've caught up. I'm caught up, kind of. I should be through this chapter, of course, but I'm not. So, all right. This chapter is about living in a multicultural world. There is some nudity in this lecture. I apologize beforehand, but it makes sense it will make sense when you see it. Not the first picture, of course. That would be too obvious. What time is it? Okay. Living in a multicultural world is what this chapter is about. Acculturation is a process by which people migrate to and learn a culture that is different from their original or heritage culture. So one of the things that you have to think about is the Dene culture. Did it originate in this area? Did the Dene people move from someplace else? I don't know. What does Wilson tell you? Where'd they come? Where'd you guys come from? You got to get this right because you need to score a high score on Wilson's test, or maybe Christine's test. Maybe she's an anthropologist. Maybe she's going to ask you this question. Where in the world did the Dene people come from? Where did you originate? If we throw out that whole coming across a Bering Strait thing. Let's just put you in North America. Okay, so where in the world did you start from?
Well, the way Wilson explains it is there's a doorway out in, I forget the mountains called, but there's a doorway from where...
It's north of here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Colorado. I think that's the right answer. I'm pretty sure that's the right answer. I'm thinking that that's what Wilson's going to tell you. You didn't start out here. You started out north of here. Okay. So you kind of migrated to this area. Potentially along with other Athabascan-speaking people. And what are the other Athabascan-speaking people in this area? Oh, come on.
All I can think of is Apache.
The Apaches, I think they're the only ones, yeah. Okay. All right, so these two groups didn't start here. Obviously, they started someplace north of here. There were Athabascan-speaking people living in Alaska. And there were Athabascan-speaking people in Canada. They're actually called the Dene, but they spell their name D-E-N-E, but they pronounce it the same. So there are Athabascan-speaking people in California. There are Athabascan-speaking people in Oregon and Washington. Okay. So potentially you started out north of here somewhere. So you migrated to this area. Now, of course, if we want to talk about migration, we can talk about any Europeans that are here. Probably they weren't here at all. I'm guessing they weren't here at all. Acculturation is a process by which people migrate to and learn a culture that is different from their original heritage culture. So now we have to ask Michelle where the Groban came from. Well, where did they start out? They speak an Algonquian language.
I don't even know.
The Algonquians were on the East Coast, so they kind of migrated over. Okay. So the Dene people migrated from the north to the south. even if it was just from Colorado to Arizona. The Grovon migrated from the east, or somewhere in the east, to Montana, potentially. Okay. Do the Grovon look the same as the Dene people? They don't, do they? They're lighter complexioned a little bit. Facial features are different a little bit. So they don't look the same. So potentially we're dealing with two groups of individuals that aren't from the same source. Okay, so people migrate, I guess. Okay. So let's pretend you want to go move someplace. Who's a K-popper? Do we have a K-popper in here? Jeff's a K-popper, of course, and you're reading about Japan, aren't you? Well, so maybe you want to move to Japan. Wouldn't that be fun?
I wanted to.
Oh, man. Okay, this is what we're going to do for the rest of your life. We're going to move you to Japan. So let's move Jeff to Japan. Moving to a new culture involves psychological adjustment. Sorry about that. They ain't the same as we are. We've already talked about the rate. You've read Murakami, and you know that there are differences. This adjustment occurs over a wide variety of domains. You need to acquire a new language, and the Japanese language is extremely complex. They have 3 alphabets, 3 ways of writing, 3 different forms. One of them is ancient. And then they have kata and katakana. And those are they have added those 2 vocabularies to their language so that they could change, so that they could be more flexible. As fun as that is. Okay, yeah. So the Japanese, reading Japanese is kind of interesting. Learning new interpersonal and social behaviors, they ain't the same as we are. Okay. Becoming accustomed to new values, and they do have different values than we do. You may think that they're flirting with you, but they ain't. Okay. They're just being friendly, or their form of friendliness. Becoming a member of a minority group, of course, if you go to Japan, if you're not Japanese, and we're going to read about this in just a minute, if you're not Japanese, you're a gaijin. Gaijin means the man who sneaks through the window at night. It's not a complimentary term. Adjusting oneself concept, of course. So you're going to have to adjust all of these things in order to fit in with the Japanese. Leisgard in 1955 tracked a number of Norwegian Fulbright scholars in the United States. In the first few months of their experiences, the migrants were having an especially positive time in their visit. So for the first 5 or 6 months, you're going to love Japan. It's going to be wonderful. If you eat seafood and you can stomach fish, my God, you just go berserk. If you can eat dried octopus, I'll tell you what. Exactly. Okay. Japan is going to be the coolest place in the whole wide world, and the people are relatively friendly. You're going to be finding new friends. I mean, it's just going to be a wonderful experience for you. They were enjoying the experiences, meeting new people, trying new foods, of course, dried octopus, communicating with people in a foreign language, which is always fun, and feeling the excitement of participating in a novel and exotic environment. And it is novel, and it is exotic to some extent. Okay, there you go. Sounds like a great time. You're going to have a great time for the rest of your life. You can live there forever.
Maybe visit.
Oberg in 1960 referred to the first few months as the honeymoon stage. There we go. Just like getting married and being on your honeymoon. It is the existence of the honeymoon stage that keeps the tourism trade in business, of course, because they don't spend enough time there to get lonely. The exoticness of the adventure never wears off. So they're still having a great time. Most travelers do not stay in a new culture long enough to move past this stage, and they thus tend to view their experiences in new cultures to be, for the most part, pleasant and exciting, because they're there for 2 weeks. They're there for a month. So they're eating new foods every night. They're meeting new people. They're only around people that they can communicate with. And of course, the tourism trade wants these people to only have positive experiences. So they surround them with people that understand that these people only speak English. They don't try to get them to speak their own language, which is always frustrating. Okay. So the tourism trade does this. They surround these people with people that can speak their language and people that understand their culture, that can guide them away from things that might irritate them. So for the first 2 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, you're having a great time in Japan. Congratulations. As long as you can stomach the fish. Dried squid, try it sometime.
I tried it on a pizza kind of thing. There's
Kind of rubbery, wasn't it? Tastes like fish.
I mean, I've had eel, which is similar to it in a way. I like eel. It's pretty good.
Tastes too much like fish. Has a fishy flavor. Following the honeymoon stage, most visitors turn a corner and they begin to have increasingly negative views about their host culture. And of course, this is what Leisgard found in 1955, looking at those Norwegian Fulbright scholars in the United States. Between 6 and 18 months, visitors experience the most negative feelings of their sojourn in a stage that has been labeled the crisis or culture shock stage. Now remember, I came down here from Iowa. I was around people from Chicago and people from Iowa at Ashford University. So there was something of a culture shock when I came down here. The biggest change was the fact I was living in a house that had no square corners in it. It's a hogan. It has a dome ceiling. I love the fireplace, but there's no damn straight corners in my house. So some of the corners are this big, and some of the corners are this big. You know, the bathroom is so weirdly shaped. It's the oddest thing in the world. Anyway, that was the hardest part to, there was no place, you couldn't put something up against something because it's like living in a round house. It just didn't work. So there was culture shock. What time is it? Oh, it's time to leave. Sorry, I almost took you guys over. Okay. Oh, good. I was going to tell you something negative, so I won't tell you anything negative now. No, the hardest thing was that you guys aren't as friendly as the people up north. Is that true, Michelle?
What?
The people here aren't as friendly as the people up north. Okay. And Andre would tell you exactly the same thing. But even the Blackfeet are friendly, and they don't like anybody. They're like Mikey. They don't like anybody, but they're... yours is a more closed society. The Grovan and the Assiniboine it's a more open society. Same way with the Blackfeet.